By the way, Ozzy actually is literally hot-footed off the plane from Jamaica today. So, a round of applause for Ozzy for making it here in one piece, please. He's had a few J&Ts. He says he can't even sit in the right seat.
I can sit there if you want me to.
You're looking well, hey. For a man who's just flown 9 hours on a small TUI flight. Amazing.
10 hours.
10 hours. It's amazing. And so, I mean, the basis of this panel really is about sort of the new sort of position the publisher finds himself and herself in. Because of various things that's happening in the industry, right? So we've had, the age of privacy come upon us. We have had legislation. We've had platform changes by the likes of Apple and Google. I just met someone in Google there actually at break. That was actually a hilarious conversation. I'll tell you about that later on. I'm just, on that basis, I want to talk about where publishers are right now, right? Because it's important to kind of like frame the conversation here, right? So we're talking about the platform-based publisher. I want to talk about that from the context of where we are right now. Ozzy, we'll start with you. Talking about from a Reuters point of view, how have you as a business sort of where are you at right now?
You have to bear with me. I'm still probably on holiday mode, so it'll take me a minute or two to get my head straight. I think from our perspective, we're still kind of moving, trying to become more customer-centric. I think that's the right word to use. Still trying to understand a lot more around what our users are doing. I don't necessarily think it's necessarily all about data and all about technology. It's really around understanding, what that user journey is going to be like. But we understand that the data definitely powers a lot of the decisions that we want to make as an organization. But also, we also understand the role in which the walled gardens are essentially, playing. So from our perspective, I just think we're very early in that journey at the moment. It's really hard for me to say that, this is exactly what we're doing. I think there's a lot of stuff that we want to do. Firstly, we're trying to understand more around our users in terms of, those that have been identified, creating content that essentially appeal to them. Those that have not been identified as yet, what can we do to essentially ensure that we're creating the right content to drive those users onto our website, so we can essentially, either capture them in some shape or form. But then beyond that, I think we also understand data is kind of allowing us to grow our business from a revenue perspective, and that's essentially where that's essentially our focus at the moment, right? Because we know that's a big revenue generator at the moment for us. So that's kind of like what I will say for now.
Yeah. Alex, we'll go to you next. I can't even see you there. Just want to drive myself, of course. From your own perspective, like how is the sort of the new environment changed the way you see the business? And obviously, you are a very different business in the sense that you have multiple revenue streams. You have a big e-commerce business and other forms of revenue. But like from the ad point of view, how has the current environment changed your perspective on how you work in the new environment?
I definitely agree with what you said about the focus on users and audience. That's really underpinning most, if not all, of what we do in the decisions that we make. I think sometimes we slightly overcomplicate what it is that advertisers and ads are trying to achieve. So essentially you're trying to connect an audience with a message of some kind. And we've got to a point where there are so many different ways of doing that maybe this whole moment of time that we're in now, whilst there's amazing technology, amazing data, amazing platforms that are out there to facilitate that, I'm personally at the point where I'm kind of just trying to refocus in on what we're all trying to achieve, be it marketer's perspective or us at Future or any publisher or media owner. And actually, it's about giving our users what they want, giving them really quality, engaging content. It's about giving our advertisers a really good platform to achieve that. And actually, a lot of the rest of it is just the peripheral stuff. You know, we can do that through technology, we can do that through data, but let's focus in on that core thing, and that will keep kind of square most of that circle and keep us and our users pretty happy.
Kofi, and from where you sit, and from a technology point of view, I mean, how are publishers sort of approaching this? I mean, we talked about this on the call, and we'll go into the ID thing in a few minutes, but, you know, has it fundamentally changed because I spoke to a large publisher this morning, and he was telling me that, like, you know, the cookie deprecation, ID deprecation has certainly affected their business. It's getting harder to sort of like get more spend from buyers. Are we in a transitionary period then from a publisher's perspective?
Yeah, I'd definitely say so. I think we have an approach which is, I think I mentioned, a portfolio approach. I think someone was on stage earlier who has a similar viewpoint, which is not having a sort of one-size-fits-all approach. So yes, you know, first-party data, you know, is seen as the sort of holy grail, but there are other addressable signals out there which can work quite effectively as well. And so what we're finding is publishers are willing to test right now. They're in a stage where they're collaborating a lot more with different technology platforms, buy side and so on, to try and really understand the changing landscape. And I think that the ones who are engaged in that are the ones who are going to have the brighter future. I think Google, they've now delayed it now to, end of 23, I think it is, something like that. So this period is a valuable period of time to really, you know, get your test in, try different methods, and see what works for you. And then I think we're going to see a lot more collaboration. And we sit at the very forefront of that in providing the technology to allow them to navigate what is quite a complex space.
Ozzy, do you agree with that we, you know, given what Google's doing, Apple's doing, that you're in this kind of test and learn phase, that in the short term this will be a difficult transition? I mean, I imagine that you have logged in users, you have context, and you have a bunch of other data signals that you have. Is that, you know, the way that you approach that sort of that transition, is that a difficult phase for you to get through?
Yes, but I think for us the priority is really around maintaining like user experience. That's a really big focus for us as an organization, because if we relaunched, you know, Reuters.com literally a year ago, actually last year. So a lot of what we're trying to do is basically ensuring that a lot of our legacy partners and a lot of our users are still happy with the experience they're experiencing on the website right now. But yeah, you know, to Kofi's point, we're definitely, you know, like testing lots of different things along the way. But, you know, with that, you know, we want to also improve, you know, kind of the content that's, you know, going on the website, you know, the experience of that content on the website, but we also want to enrich profiles as well. You know, we do have users who are logged in. We don't have a subscription service. We essentially encourage users after 2+ articles to register, because obviously we want to prepare for the deprecation of that third-party cookie. So we're encouraging users to register so we can have a bit more information about them. We've launched things like newsletters as well, so we can essentially look at doing some syncing and some matching, and we've got some onboarders like LiveRamp who are helping us to understand, you know, where these users fit in, because not only do we have on-site data available to us, we also have offline data as well, you know, in the types of like newsletters, in, you know, the wider TR, you know, in terms of like the organization. I mean, for those who aren't aware, Reuters is part of the Thomson Reuters group of organizations, and then within that we have lots of different business vehicles in there, and we want to try and look at how we can tap into that second party data, which at the moment, you know, none of that's actionable right now. So there's lots of work to do in that space. I
mean, the industry is obsessed about keeping the status quo. ID companies. I mean, there was 150 apparently ID companies that were at programmatic I/O, right? 150. Alex, I want to talk about this for a minute because this is important. I mean, IDs are going to play an important role, but do you think that's going to consolidate into 1, 2, 3, you know, IDs of choice going forward? And is the industry's obsession with IDs? It's not the panacea, obviously. We have to think sort of broader than that.
Yes, I definitely think so. I think that IDs were some of the first solutions that, there have been certain ID companies that have been talking about this for probably 5 years now, maybe even longer. And there is definitely a focus on IDs, and I think IDs have a massive place to play. I think the expression that always comes to mind with IDs is mushrooms springing up after a rain. There's a lot. 150 is a pretty crazy amount, and
I mean, do they scale? Is that going to scale? I don't think so.
Probably not 150. Some of them will scale, and I think that there will be a place for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 IDs. It might be more. There will be specialist IDs that are done by geo, by publisher groupings, whatever it is. Our industry is incredibly innovative. And usually we see these trends quite a lot, that there are lots of innovations, and then it will consolidate down to a certain amount of companies that are doing it really well, that have looked at things from all perspectives. There's a surprising amount of tech that I see where I might ask a question about this or ask a question about that, and they'll say to me, oh, we've never spoken to publishers about this before. We've actually only really been doing this on the ad tech side. And so good tech companies will look at all of those perspectives when they're building out their business cases. Will make sure that they're trying to catch as much as possible. Obviously, if that's what they're going for. If they're trying to be niche, then there's a place for that as well. IDs, I've always thought that the cookie, all of this is kind of happening because the third-party cookie is being deprecated. The third-party cookie facilitates countless different functions online. It's not just audience and ID matching, it's so many different things. So it would be naive of us to think as an industry that one solution can cover off those multiple things, especially when you're trying to build it in a more compliance privacy world. You're not going to necessarily get that. So IDs have a very important place, but they sit alongside passing values into the bid stream, whatever that looks like. They sit alongside new metrics, attribution, attention metrics. They sit alongside contextual. They sit alongside direct. They sit alongside, publishers leveraging their first-party data sets and working together.
But is that a problem? Because obviously the buy side would love a standardized approach, right? Cookies, IDs solve that problem, right? Where you can have like a scaled buy. Now we have potentially customized, fragmented way of approaching things. Do you think that that's going to cause problem in terms of money? Because you hear like the Chicken Little are saying the world's going to end, or we're doomed, Google's going to have all the money, blah, 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 fall asleep. But the reality is, like, do buyers want that? Or will you think there's going to be closer relationships between the buy side and the sell side, particularly around, premium publishers like yourself?
I think that, I don't know if it's a problem, but it's definitely a different way of trading. I'm not a marketer, so I'm not going to sit here and talk about marketing, but there are some addressable solutions that exist at the moment that are easy, that are leverageable and scalable, that might not exist in the future. And that might be a problem, and there are definitely things on the publisher side that we have to address, that we might not necessarily be able to do in a year or two, whenever the deadline actually comes. Whether or not that's a problem long term is a different matter, because as we say now, there are things that we know, and we know that this is coming. We know that we need to build new solutions that can do most of those things, and maybe build some new solutions. You make a very good point. We're all addicted to the status quo. It is because we all have our individual things that we need to achieve today. We have our targets. We have our users. We don't want to lose them. We don't want to annoy them. And yet we're also planning for something that is going to happen in a year, 2 years. I mean, we've all been talking about this for 3 years already, probably longer for a lot of people. And we still don't really know when it's exactly going to happen. So we might be sitting here next year talking about the same thing. But what we do know is that there are things that we can do right now to try and just nudge that forward a little bit. Yeah,
Kofi, because you talked about the ID issue on the call as well, and you think that there will be some kind of consolidation there. But at this stage, publishers need to kind of just test and learn which ones are going to work best for their own sort of needs.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as you mentioned, there's kind of an abundance of different ID solutions out there. And I think the ones that will ultimately survive, if you will, are the ones that have the stronger buy-side relationships. Now, the ones I speak to, the ones we've partnered with, we're seeing some, great conversations and great progress happening from those conversations. But another thing that we have to take into consideration is it's one thing to have the tech, but you've got to make sure you're data compliant as well. So from a publisher standpoint, you've got to make sure you do your due diligence on these partners, because at the end of the day, you're only sort of one PR data leakage or PR away from a PR sort of disaster. So making sure you're working with the right partners. Tech can be great, but you've got to make sure that they have that holistic approach and making sure that they cover all bases. But they all use different methodology as well. That's the other aspect. And I think some will resonate with some buyers over others. But time will tell, and that's why I think the more testing that goes into play, the more results you're going to get, and you can make key decisions on the back of that.
And that'd probably be part of a bigger mix, though. Like you're talking about one signal, right? So the IDs, think about it logically, probably won't scale across Safari. So you might use contextual, or you might use first-party data signals. So it's going to be a future of a mixed solution. And it brings us on to the next question in terms of...
I actually want to say I actually don't think it will be from the buy side. I actually think it will be from the sell side. I think we're probably going to need more like publisher IDs. So you were talking about scaling earlier on, and I still think IDs are kind of like a short-term fix. But I actually think there'll be a point in which we will have to obviously have IDs from different types of organizations. But I actually think publishers will probably need to do some work to collaborate with each other and create a publisher ID which can allow them to essentially scale. So I don't necessarily think it's the buy side. I think there's some stuff needs to happen on the sell side in order for that to be
Do you think
scalable.
that the stuff like cohorts or seller-defined audiences are the ones that will help in that regard?
Yeah, but it's still only a small group of audience, right? I mean, you're just moving from one-to-one to a small group. So I think it's a great idea, and I think it would just be an additional tactic. I just don't think it's like the holy grail, if that's the right word to use.
Sorry, go ahead, Kofi.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting concept. I think it's kind of taking away the historical basis in which targeting or matching was done on the buy side, much more to the sell side. But I think we'll have to see how that one plays out, because you've got a certain responsibility to put those users into the right cohorts. And, can we all trust that that's necessarily going to be the case? And I think from a buy standpoint, I think there will have to be a lot more collaboration to kind of test, are we getting the ROI on those campaigns? Or, can we trust that the data has been amalgamated and set in the right way? But I think scale can come from that if there's a lot more collaboration with different publishers pulling together to do that. But time will tell. But I think it's an interesting concept, and it kind of gives publishers a bit more confidence and control, because you're stripping away the privacy aspects or the personal identifiable information from that and allowing that to run in the bid stream as well. So I think it's a really interesting concept, and we'll see how it plays out.
A lot of people are downcast about the open web, right? Because obviously, you two guys are on the open web, right? But a lot of industry insiders and even some of the industry bodies are a little bit sort of alarmist about the future of the open web. But do you think like new innovations like clean rooms, which are quite interesting, will change the dynamic in there? Like the ability to kind of like segment data in a privacy-first way on the publisher side. Alex, we'll start with you first, that one. But do you think like innovation like that will help to solve a lot of these problems, particularly when you have multiple data signals that you want to put together?
Yeah, I think clean rooms massively have a part to play. I think they have their space as long as they are addressable and they're linked to activation in some way. I've seen some in the past that are kind of just like planning tools, and they don't really seem to kind of cover off the main use cases for me. I'm not as skeptical about the future of the open web. I think it's always going to have its place. I think there is definitely space for publishers and media owners who are looking to kind of close off things a little bit more to reg wall, to paywall, to whatever that is. Not quite a walled garden, but a similar thought process sometimes. I think it's not that I'm not skeptical about the future of it. It's more that I don't see some of the things about the open web some of the bad things about it as a bad thing. I think that we need a bit of a push sometimes of it as an industry to do not the right thing, that's not the right way to look at it, but to clean things up a little bit as an industry, to focus in, slightly sometimes less is more, which is not always what people want to hear, because very much more is more a lot of the time. But I think as we're all users of the internet, I think we can all appreciate that sometimes we need to kind of scale things back a little bit and have more highly targeted, better advertising.
Sorry, Ozzy, do you think all these things are good in the long term for publishers because they can gain more control over the business? I think for the last 10 years we've kind of like had a over-reliance on algorithms and DSP algorithms and sort of buy-side data. Does this give publishers the opportunity to regain some of the control, particularly over how they sell their own audiences?
Well, clean rooms specifically, or just generally
Well,
speaking?
just generally, I think the clean rooms is part of that sort of solution. But do you think like deprecation of cookies, deprecation of IDs, the move to privacy first, sort of putting the user first in the first instance?
Yeah, definitely. I think like I always look at like the industries always felt like a hack of a hack of a hack. It's like something's not working, we'll hack it and do something else. And I think it's kind of got to a point where everything's just almost being reset, right? And publishers are being given a bit more opportunity to earn more money from their inventory, which I think is like fantastic, have more say over how their data is used and processed. But then also, the average consumer is a lot smarter than they used to be, right? So they want to know the value exchange in like, what am I getting for giving you the authorization for you to use my data and my information. I don't think we give them enough credit for some of the stuff that happens there. So I think all of these different tools all have their purposes. Clean Room, I think it will be great for like creating like really strategic relationships with some, maybe not all businesses, but some businesses. I think it's a great tool for like measurement and analyzing data and optimizing data as well. But then I think all the other tactics that we're speaking about, be it ID solutions or whatever, I think publishers, it's probably like a great time for us to really take the onus and go, right, this is how we want to manage that process. Especially with, the scrutiny the walled gardens are getting from, the regulators at the moment as well. So I think it's definitely a great time for us to say, hey, this is what we want to do, this is how we want to do it. And because when you look at the industry, lots of the tools that were created weren't really created for publishers first. They were created for the buyers. So when you have tools being created for publishers, as in, for example, the Permitive, which we use, I think it's great because it's like that's a tool made for publishers, that's a DMP, and it's not a hack or reverse engineered product for us. Because often what I find is when products are re-engineered for publishers, they don't talk to our systems in the same way. So I think there's definitely a role to play for all publishers, because at the moment we're competing with each other quite often, but in reality, I don't think we need to compete with each other. I think we all just need to, I think someone earlier said about sharing like the success stories or something like that, what's worked well, and I think our publishers need to look at doing stuff like that again, having more alliance meetings and working out what works for us and trying to push that forward as an industry.
Kofi, are you seeing that as well? I mean, your product roadmap is much more always been publisher focused. In fairness, but are you seeing that you have to evolve your product around what publishers are in a new situation?
Yeah, most definitely. As they shift their priorities and their needs, we have to adjust in kind. But like you said, we've historically been publisher focused, but we're having to work with different partners in this space to try and navigate, as I said, what is quite a complex environment. But we see ourselves as a sort of thought leaders and helping them navigate that space. And we're seeing some positive results, a few proof of concepts, which I can't obviously talk about, going on. And we're seeing a hell of a lot more collaboration, but a lot more creativity and innovation on the supply side for sure.
All right, on that note, we'll finish up, but we could easily sit here for hours talking about the publisher platform. But let's just say the publishers are in a bad spot at the minute, but it's in the long term. I think you guys are going to be in a great position and taking power of your business. So, round of applause, please, for our panelists.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ozzy. Round of applause, Ozzy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.